Hello everyone, welcome again to our class, and for this time, let's discuss about the Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation. So let's define benevolent. No, it means kind, and assimilation, it means the process whereby individuals or groups of differing ethnic heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. So it's more of a kind way of reabsorption, no, or dominating a culture, or a society in general. Like the Philippines, no, we are dominated and we are assimilated. Okay, so benevolent assimilation referred to a policy of the US towards the Philippines as described in a proclamation by US President William McKinley that issued a memorandum to the US Secretary of War on December 21, 1898. So, following the signing of this treaty which ended the Spanish-American War. So, it stated that future control, disposition, and government of the Philippines island had been ceded to the US, and the US military government was to extend over to be the whole of the ceded territory. So, it was through this proclamation, it clarified the President McKinley, no, and the proclamation of December 21, 1898, also through this treaty as being ratified or validated by the Senate of the US on February 6, 1899. So again, this is the event, no, wherein the Americans had converted Philippines as its annex of America. So this is that event, the benevolent assimilation. No, it includes the intentions of the Americans to stay in the Philippines to practice and exercise sovereignty over its inhabitants as again the annex of America. So again, it happened during the time of President McKinley. So according also to him, it was not easy task on making this decision. So there are some key points that had led towards this decision of the benevolent assimilation proclamation. Okay, like this would not give them back to the Spain, that would be cowardly and dishonorable, that we could not turn them over to France and Germany because our commercial rivals in the Orient, no, that would be a bad business and discredibility also for them, that we could not leave them towards themselves. They were unfit for self-government. That's how they interpreted the inhabitants, no, the Filipinos during that time. They would soon have anarchy and misrule over their worse than the Spain was. So they are interpreting that we cannot lead by our own, no? Na tayo Pilipinas, tayo Philippines, hindi pa natin kaya mag-self-governed. And that there was nothing for us to do but to take them all and to educate the Filipinos and uplift, civilize, and Christianize them. And by God's grace, do the very best we could to them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died. So, yeah, so these are the reasons why this benevolent assimilation had turned into an event, or that turned into transpiration. However, after this proclamation, Aguinaldo later issued a counter-proclamation that opposed the prospect of annexation. So may mga hindi nag-agree, may mga nag-contest, no, na hindi dapat to gawin. On June 12, 1898, Emilio Aguinaldo declared the Philippines independent and established a revolutionary government whose the Filipino Revolutionary Armed Forces surrounded Manila and the occupying American Army. So, nagkaroon ng revolutionary government tayo, no? We try to revolt from this decision, from this event. No? It then created a standoff between opposing armies that would erupt in fighting in early 1899 to ignite the Philippine-American War. Okay, so nagkaroon na talaga ng sabakan, no? So ayaw talaga natin because yun yung mga reasons at ayaw nating ma-under tayo sa American. So nagkaroon at mas naging masigasig pa tayo yung mga leaders by that time that then ignited the war against Americans. Okay, now let's go to Bataan has fallen. So this transpired mainly during the period of the Japanese regime. So after April 9, 1942, the US surrender of the Bataan Peninsula on the main Philippine island of Luzon to the Japanese during the World War II. It has approximately 75,000 Filipino and American troops on Bataan that were forced to make an arduous 65-mile march to prison camps. So imagine that, no? It is death march talaga, Bataan death march. No, the marchers made the trek in intense heat and were subjected to harsh treatment by these Japanese guards, and thousands perished in what became known as the Bataan death march. So it was during this Japanese time or regime na nagkaroon ng ganitong klaseng event, no? Talagang mistreatment talaga, no? Both Americans and Filipino troops. So, the day after Japan bombed the US naval base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Japanese invasion of the Philippines began already. Within a month, the Japanese had captured Manila, the capital of the Philippines, and the American and Filipino defenders of Luzon, or the island on which Manila is located, were forced to retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. Okay, ito yung mga events during this Bataan has fallen. For the next 3 months, the combined US and Filipino army held out despite a lack of naval and air support. So, nagtulungan silang dalawa, no? Kasi hindi na kaya yung ganitong klaseng pagpaghihirap na binigay sa atin or na ginawa sa atin ng mga Japanese occupants. Finally, on April 9, with his forces crippled by starvation and disease, no? So US General Edward King Jr. surrendered his approximately 75,000 troops at Bataan. So, yun, may mga mistreatment, slavery, hunger, poverty, no, na nangyari during this occupation. So also, this date is very crucial. April 1942, the surrendered Filipinos and Americans soon were rounded up by the Japanese and forced to march some 65 miles from Mariveles on the southern end of the Bataan Peninsula to San Fernando. So, ito, no? Grabe ang harshness, no? Grabe ang layo, no? The men were divided into groups of approximately 100, and the march typically took each group around 5 days to complete. So ito yung example nito, no? Yung picture dito, Bataan, or yung Death March, Bataan Death March. So the survivors were taken by rail from San Fernando to prisoner of war camps. So there are 1,000 of troops died because of this event, no? Because of this brutality of their captors who starved and beat the marchers and bayoneted them those weak to walk, no? So talagang it's really how can I say it? Very much hindi makatarungan, no? Or talagang harsh, kumbaga. So, the aftermath, after this event, America avenged its defeat in the Philippines with the invasion of the island of Leyte in October 1944. So General Douglas MacArthur had then famously promised, no, I shall return to the Philippines, no, wherein he is good on his word. And in February 1945, the US Filipino forces recaptured the Bataan Peninsula and Manila was liberated in early March. Okay, so nagkaroon na ng parang reconciliation or nagkaroon na ng resolution, no? After the war, an American military tribunal tried Lieutenant General Homa Masaharu, the commander of the Japanese invasion forces in the Philippines. No, siya yung general during that time. He was held responsible for this death march, a war crime, and was executed by firing squad on April 3, 1946. Okay, these are the events which transpired, no? Just take note of this one. Alright, now let's proceed to the 1976 Tripoli Agreement. Now, President Ferdinand Marcos had declared martial law in September 1972, which contributed on the Moro conflict in Mindanao, which led to the foundation of the Moro National Liberation Front, or MNLF, with Nur Mishwari as the chair. Okay, take note of that one. It was Nur Mishwari who is the chair of the MNLF. At that time, MNLF received support from Libya and Malaysia that led President Ferdinand Marcos to offer Muammar Gaddafi a lucrative oil deal in exchange for his withdrawal of his support to the MNLF via Malaysia. Okay, so on 1976, the Tripoli Agreement was signed on December 23, 1976 in Tripoli, Libya by Carmelo Z. Barbero, which represents the government of the Philippines, and Nur Mishwari of the Moro National Liberation Front. So, nagkaroon sila ng agreement, no? Para hindi na magkaroon ng conflict, magkaroon sila ng resolution na sign ang Tripoli Agreement. So, tripartite po ang ibig sabihin, Tripoli, no? So, tatlong parties ang involved dito. So, the agreement between the government of the Philippines and Moro National Liberation Front with the participation of the Quadri-Party Ministerial Commission members of the Islamic Conference and the Secretary General of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Okay, by this, it defined the autonomous administrative divisions for Muslims in the southern Philippines. No, there is that establishment of autonomy, no, autonomous government and judicial system for Sharia law. Ito yung law na pinaniniwalaan ng mga Muslim brothers and sisters natin. Okay, and the autonomous region was have its own economic system which includes an Islamic bank, no? Yun, nagkaroon na ng quite bit of autonomy yung mga Muslim brothers and sisters natin. Pero hindi pa talaga siya, it was not fully realized by this time. Marami pang mga naging changes, mga naging resolutions during the administration years, no, ng mga iba't ibang presidents. During these negotiations, which marked by a spirit of conciliation and understanding, it has been agreed on the following. So may dalawang agreement, no, na nangyari. The establishment of autonomy in the southern Philippines within the realm of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of the Philippines. And second is the areas of the autonomy for the Muslims in the southern Philippines shall comprise the following: Basilan, Sultan Kudarat, Sulu, Lanao del Norte, Tawi-Tawi, Lanao. So parte na to, no, na binubuo, no, na may autonomy na talaga yung autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao, okay, which is Barn by now, or Bangsamoro Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao. So ito yung mga iba't ibang mga provinces which is included na kailangan naming maging autonomous, okay, with the national government. But again, sa ganitong klaseng time pa kasi hindi pa talaga fully na-realize yung pagkakasarinlan ng ARM or ng BARN ngayon. Okay? Ito lang yung nag-spark or nag-start ng negotiation, no, or agreement. Other terms of agreement includes Muslims have the right to set their own administrative system, economic codes, and to set up their own court, autonomy and amnesty agreements, and etc. So also ceasefire shall be declared immediately after the signature of this agreement, that provided that its coming into effect should not exceed the 20th on January 1977. Okay, so ito yung parang naging resolution nila para hindi talaga totally mag-away na or sumulong na talaga, no? Or magkaroon na ng war. Okay, para talaga ma-fix somehow ang naging problema between MNLF, okay, and the national government. And that will be all on my presentation. I hope you could read this articles, yung mga journals na nasa course natin and all. Thank you so much for listening and be nationalistic. Goodbye.